You know what your problem is?
I ain't got no problem, man. Don't tell me what my problem is.
Scrappy and Khaotic's pairing, which was initially only supposed to be another scheduled match, quickly turned into a heated clash. The atmosphere on the Love and Hip Hop Atlanta set was thrilling and brimming with the energy that only reality television could deliver. The camera was rolling, recording the latest tale in a season that had already seen its fair share of violent occurrences. But nobody, not even the season crew, could have predicted the utter intensity that would unfurl. With multiple storylines simmering to the surface, the crew prepared for another round of hard filming. However, Scrappy had a different kind of day because he had been dealing with a lot of personal pressure lately, including relationship trouble, family issues, and the show's relentless spotlight. He was worried that no stranger would leave the cast, and the audience seemed incredulous. Scrappy was not the only person who didn't like Khaotic's antics, but something about the way Khaotic had been tormenting him and trying to get under his skin lately had been driving Scrappy crazy. Scrappy had been in the spotlight for years. The usual stressor that caused Scrappy to become tense today was Khaotic. The audacious newcomer, known for his sharp tongue and even sharper attitude, had been making a big scene ever since he joined the program. Khaotic has been subtly damaging Scrappy's reputation for weeks by making fun of his previous relationships and his position in the hip-hop and love scenes. The situation began quite casually. The producers who had arranged for the two guys to meet were mistaken to think it would be another verbal sparring session while the cameras rolled feverishly. Scrappy had attempted to dismiss it, but he was at a loss. With a mocking tone, Scrappy went on the attack right away. How long have you been on this program and still not know how to run your business? Khaotic's remarks were like knives piercing Scrappy's pride, and his sneer only made it worse. It was the sign of someone who was anxious to hear back. Scrappy's patience was beginning to wear thin, and his jaw was getting tighter. He'd been trying to keep his cool, but Khaotic's constant teasing was wearing him down. I had never fought before, but this was different. Scrappy would not put up with Khaotic's disparaging comments about his identity, integrity, relationships, and personal life on the television. "Man, you have to be cautious what you say," said Scrappy in a very quiet voice. Naturally, Khaotic was not one to back down. Rather, he applied more pressure. "Please pay attention to what I say. I'm just saying that you're not as strong as you once were, Scrappy." In one quick motion, Scrappy's palm shot out, giving Khaotic a hard slap across the face. The crash reverberated throughout the set, and for a minute the thunderous crack seemed to freeze everything in place. The whole crew, who had been filming with tense anticipation, gasped in unison as Khaotic's head snapped sideways, his expression bewildered. Scrappy was another washed-up man feigning relevance. And there was anger now. There was no turning back now that the slap had set a fire that neither man seemed keen to put out. "You think you will get away with merely slapping me?" Khaotic instantly recovered his composure after a brief period of shock. With fire in his eyes, he lunged toward Scrappy, pushing past the security officers who hurried to intervene. The camera panned in to capture the chaos as it unfolded, as the UN fell apart. Scrappy stood, his fist clenched in a shout of hatred, his body stiff with anger. "You have been running your mouth too long, and now you see what happens when you do not know how to stop it," Scrappy remarked in a sour tone. He held his ground, his chest pounding from the adrenaline rush, his own anger equal to Khaotic's. As the two men who were still under security restraint faced off, the actors and staff across the stage watched in stunned silence. The only sounds that broke the stillness were heavy breathing and muted screaming, and there was a palpable sense of tension throughout the room. It was obvious that the primary issue had shifted from the slap to respect for two men who had had enough and were too cocky to quit up. The crew immediately separated the guys, driving them in opposite directions in an attempt to defuse the situation, and the producers promptly called a break when they realized that things had gotten much worse than they had anticipated. But the cameras continued to roll, and the damage was already done. Even though the battle was finished for the time being, it was obvious that Scrappy and Khaotic's animosity was still very much alive, and as the aftermath was captured on camera, it became plain that chaos and love were still at odds. More than just a spontaneous response, the slap was a public declaration that Scrappy would not permit anyone, not even Khaotic, to treat him with contempt or try to replace him. Atlanta's hip-hop scene had just seen one of its most explosive moments, yet as his rage grew, his gaze stayed fixed on Khaotic, and a perilous silence descended upon him while the surrounding crowd erupted in ecstasy. There was a noticeable strain in the air as Scrappy's muscles tensed. Bambi, who had overheard Khaotic making disparaging remarks, stood close enough to observe the storm building. Since her husband was no stranger to confrontation and sometimes got into disagreements with the other actors, she knew he would not take it well. But this time the stakes were higher and it was personal. Scrappy would not allow anyone to abuse his wife, not in public, not on stage, and most definitely not without repercussions. With a single motion, Lil Scrappy, whose patience was running low, stepped toward Khaotic. The audience started whispering as they realized what was going to happen, but Khaotic, who was still grinning, wouldn't back down because he was accustomed to being the center of attention. But he soon discovered that things had suddenly been worse than he had anticipated. Although she had always known that Scrappy would protect her, she felt uneasy seeing his ferocious protection of her. They were inseparable. Reaching up, Lil Scrappy slapped Khaotic across the face. The sound of the slap followed Khaotic's face and reverberated around the room with a mixture of pride and comfort. The rest of the cast watched in stunned silence, some unsure of how to respond, some perhaps secretly relieved that Khaotic had been selected to finally take Lil Scrappy's position. There was no doubt about the message, family comes first. The show went on, but the mood had changed. As the cameras panned out, the smack that reverberated throughout the room served as a reminder of the lengths Scrappy would go to in order to protect those he cared about. How might this change the group dynamic going forward? Had Khaotic finally faced Lil Scrappy, or would he retaliate? There was little question that this drama was far from over, regardless of what transpired next. Khaotic quickly realized that the situation had gotten far worse than he had anticipated, despite his insistence on not giving up and his propensity for being the center of attention. Scrappy had shown his worth. She was aware that they were inextricably linked, despite the fact that it had affected her, and it moved her to see him aggressively defend her. The rest of the cast watched in stunned silence, some unsure of how to respond, some perhaps secretly relieved that Khaotic had been selected to finally take Lil Scrappy's position. There was no doubt about the message, family comes first. The show went on, but the mood had changed. The hit that reverberated throughout the room, reminding everyone of Scrappy's extended presence, would never be forgotten. She knew they were inextricably bound together. It was still unknown as the cameras panned out how Scrappy's readiness to do whatever it took for people he cared about would impact the group dynamic in the future. Would Khaotic act strangely, or had he finally seen his equal, Lil Scrappy? This drama was far from over, regardless of what transpired next. The air was tense and Scrappy's muscles tensed up. Standing close by, Bambi sensed the storm building since she had heard crude, irate remarks. It wouldn't amuse the husband.